Hi, everybody. Alan Arnett here with another podcast and a blog on alanarnett.com. It is Sunday, May 3rd. So we finally made it to May, gang. Congratulations. And this is another episode of Weekend Update for covering Everest 2026. Well, they finally got the ropes in Camp 2. That's the biggest news of this past week. And Sherpas have been going up by the scores to establish Camp 1 and Camp 2. When I say establish, that means that for Camp 1, at the top of the ice fall, they're simply bringing up tents primarily. Then individual clients come up, with their sleeping bag, and they have maybe a tent set up for melting snow and boiling water and cooking some food. But the real camp is at Camp 2, also known as Advanced Base Camp, at the base of the Lhotse Face. And that one is a lot more sophisticated. It's really like a mini base camp. And in my opinion, there's way too much luxury at that camp. It should be something like on Denali, where it's just basically the tent is what you're going to stay in. But they have dining tents with tables and chairs. I have a huge cooking tent for the Sherpas to do the cooking in. So it's pretty sophisticated. It's pretty civilized. But that's the jumping off point to go on to the up the Lhotse Face to Camp 3 and of course onto the summit. But the elephant in the room is that big old Serac, and the icefall doctors are still putting out warnings about the Serac. In fact, they put out a more or less of a press release, and in essence, it says that. I'll read you a part of it. It says that as of April 28th, so a few days ago, the route beyond the rockfall point carries significant risk due to the large serac. All climbers and guides must exercise extreme caution. So, there's still that Serac and it's hanging there. They gave some measurements of it also. It's 55 meters long, 28 meters high, and 37 meters in breadth. So think of it, it's kind of like a refrigerator. So it'd be like 100 foot by 200 foot by 100 foot refrigerator size. But it's bigger than a refrigerator, obviously. And it is slowly teetering right there, and it will fall. And so that's the big question when is it going to fall? And hopefully it's going to fall, maybe, in the dead of night when nobody's in the area, or maybe in the afternoon when nobody's going through the ice fall because it gets too hot. But, gang, this is serious. And each individual team is having to, look at that risk and make their determinations about whether they want to go through the ice fall or not. I've gotten a lot of questions on social media and comments on the podcast. And by the way, thanks everybody for your comments. I really enjoy reading them. That why don't you just blow it up, like they do at a ski resort? Just, take some type of a missile or dynamite or even fly a drone into it to cause it to collapse. Well, there's two or three reasons why that's not a good idea. And probably, I've learned never to say never when it comes to Nepal. We'll talk about that in a minute. But one is that Everest is in Sagarmatha National Park. It's a national park of Nepal. So it'd be similar to going into Yosemite and blowing up part of Half Dome. Everest is not a ski resort, and it's not a snow slope where you can go drop dynamite or explosives from a helicopter and trigger a man-made avalanche. If this thing is the size of a house, like I just said, it's a huge, huge refrigerator, 200 feet high. So if that thing falls, when it falls, it is going to explode on impact. And so that debris field is going to go from one side of the ice fall to the other. It's almost irrelevant where the route is, because once that thing falls, it's going to fall apart, and there's going to be, ice cubes all over the place, and you just don't want to be there when it comes down. So in fact, the debris field could actually cause more damage than having it just stay up there. But eventually, it's going to fall, and that debris field is going to be there, and it's going to take some time for that to get integrated into the ice fall proper. And the third reason is that I'm not even sure it would work. Yeah, I guess you could always use enough explosives, but I'm not sure it would, what it would take, how big of an explosive that it would take, and flying a drone into it. I think that'd be like a gnat, be like a mosquito. You just kind of swat it away. So I get the notion of flying a drone or trying to explode it are interesting ideas. I think they've been suggested by lots of people in Nepal, but I think it's just let nature take its course, and the climbers are going to have to evaluate the risk and make a decision on that. So, in addition to the Serac hanging up there, by Camp One this past week, a summit climb Sherpa fell into a crevasse. Thankfully, he was wearing a backpack that in the crevasse was narrow enough that his backpack kind of lodged him in, but he wasn't roped up. He wasn't clipped into the fixed rope because it wasn't there yet. And that's a that's a dangerous place to be to fall into a crevasse. And I know that from firsthand experience because in 2002, when I was going through there, I fell into a crevasse right there in that exact same area, right just outside of Camp One as you're going towards Camp Two. It was a really foggy day, couldn't see anything. I was following Geralder in front of me, one of my teammates, and I saw the boot path. And I looked off to my left and I saw a little small crack, and I thought, the boot path could be going over a crevasse. And so I took an extra wide step, but it wasn't wide enough, and bam, I fell straight through. Now, thankfully, Geralder from Iceland was in front of me. I was roped to him, and Rob from Chicago was behind me. I was roped to him. So I was in the rocking chair, as they say, and I fell in, and both of them did exactly what you're supposed to do. They self-arrested, caught me dangling. I fell about 15 feet into it. My feet were dangling in the air. My nose was pressed up against the side of the crevasse wall. It was about, I guess, maybe 2.5 feet wide. And I looked down because I was using trekking poles. I saw one of my trekking poles on a little ledge, maybe 300 feet down. And I'll tell you what, gang, it scared me to death. But thankfully, with Rob Holt or Geralder doing self-arrest, he was the one supporting my weight. Rob came over and hauled my sorry butt out of there, and we continued. But it was a unsettling moment falling into a crevasse. I don't wish it upon anybody. And something else I want to talk about is these what the teams are doing since the icefall was roughly 2 weeks late, and the route getting in was roughly 2 weeks late. They've been acclimatizing on alternative peaks all throughout the Khumbu. So if you look at the different camps, Camp 1, 2, and 3, they've got elevations respectively of around 19,500, 21,500, and 23,000. So for each one of those altitudes, those elevations, there are trekking peaks, which are very attainable, relatively safe. In other words, not a lot of objective danger, maybe with a couple exceptions. But Island Peak is at 20,000 feet. So that's similar to Camp One. Lobuche East, that's the one that I think Russell Bryce was one of the first people to do that back 2 decades ago when he switched over from the north side to the Nepal side. So they use that as a pre-acclimatization. That gives you 20,000 feet, about 6,200 meters. And that's a great one to do. That's what I did on my summit climb. I did it in 2011. Went with IMG and we went to Lobuche, and then we went on to base camp and do our other rotations. As far as Camp 2 goes at 21.5, Amana Blanc and Mira Peak, they're both in that right at that 21, 22,000 foot range, so similar to Camp 2. People, I know, climbing the seven summits, they are spending nights over on Mira Peak to acclimatize. And if you want to get up to Camp 3, that used to be the gold standard that you spent the night at Camp 3. These days, people don't do it because they feel like the return on the investment's not good enough versus the wear and tear on your body of climbing up the Lhotse face, that extra time. But people can go over to Burunse. It's at 23,400 feet. So that's right at 7,000 meters, as is Himlung is also around 7,000 meters. That's become a very popular trekking peak as well as a acclimatization peak. And that's probably the one that if the 7,000 meter rule goes in for Everest permit applicants, Himlung is probably going to be the one that most people are going to get. It's relatively non-technical compared to Burunse, which is also 7,000 meters, but it's a moderately technical peak. So it require more skills than most Everest climbers have, actually. The other way of addressing this acclimatization is using the hypoxic tents. Some people feel you can get to 17,000 feet. Other people claim up to 23. But I used to be skeptical of it, but I'm not anymore. I've just seen too many people use it successfully. So I think it's a good technique to use at home, and it definitely will eliminate at least one rotation. But if you think about it, what they're doing this year, because they couldn't go through the ice fall and they're forced to go to the other peaks, and not only Lobuche, but also now they're doing maybe two, maybe going to Lobuche as well as to Burunse or Mera Peak. Those are kind of the three primary ones that that there's a good chance that these teams will only do one rotation, one climb through the ice fall, well, two actually, one up and one down. It always should be an even number, not an odd number. But so if they are come into base camp and they're fully acclimatized to, let's say, 21,500 feet, the equivalent of Camp Two, there's really no need to go through that ice fall, spend 2 or 3, 4 nights at Camp Two if they've done the similar elevation conditioning on these other peaks. So we'll see how it plays out. Last week I talked about that given the delay, I was kind of making a prediction about what timing would be, and it looks like I wasn't too far off. I'm hearing that the ropes, they're targeting May 14th for the summit. We'll talk about the weather here in a second, but May 14th, so that's, about 10 days, 11 days from now. And if they can do that, then I think you'll see masses of people climbing primarily with the Nepali teams, the big teams like 8K and Seven Summits Treks and 14 Peaks Nose. I think you'll see all of them heading up between the 15th and the 20th, and then you'll see the Western companies hold back, and they'll go up from the 20th to the 25th and try to get that in before the monsoons arrive in late May, early June. Another activity or something news that happened this past week is that we kept hearing about the drones. Last year they experimented with the drones to carry gear up to the Camp One for rope fixing and trash down for Camp One. It was a great success, and so they were doing it again this year. And in fact, the company that provided Airlift Technologies, they actually upgraded their drones for more weight capacity, so they could carry heavier loads. And but then all of a sudden, the Home Ministry of Nepal said they can't use them, and that they had operational concerns and security concerns about having unmanned aircraft flying around Everest. So all of a sudden, all this great progress that was being made, the icefall doctors were using it to get ladders and ropes up to camp, even at Camp Two, that all of a sudden all that's come to a halt. And in the role it can play in bringing trash down, which Nepal claimed was a top priority, that stopped. So hopefully calmer heads will prevail and they'll figure out, what their concerns are, and they'll allow them to keep on going using the drones this season. Sadly, we have a death. It's not on Everest per se. Lapka Tindi Sherpa, 51-year-old from the Khumbu area. He died around 17,000 feet while being with an expedition group that was trekking to base camp. So again, technically this is not an Everest death, but it's sad nonetheless for his family. My condolences go out to them. Also, the icefall doctors had a gruesome discovery that with the climate change and the icefall thinning, it's not receding as much as it's thinning, but it did expose a body. They don't know who it is. The body has now been returned to Kathmandu to do a DNA analysis. But it was, there's some pictures of it out there. I'm not going to put it on my blog out of respect for that individual and their family, but it looked pretty preserved in the pictures that I saw. The other 8,000-meter mountains, there continues to be summits on those, Annapurna, Dhaulagiri, Makalu, and two Ukrainian young men. They did something really unprecedented. It was just the two of them on Manaslu. It sounded like it was a pretty harrowing experience. They only brought one tent with them, and so when they went on their summit push, they ended up having to bivvy just with sleeping bags in the open night. But they did it. Congratulations on their summit, and they got back down safely. So, looking ahead next week, hopefully the ropes will reach the South Col, and that'll allow the Sherpas to be able to stock it with supplemental oxygen and all the other necessary supplies for people going on their summit push. But the weather. So I reached out to a couple of friends, Chris Tomer and Michael Fagan, and they both pretty much agreed on the same thing, that the weather looks pretty good here over the next window from mainly the 8th through the 12th. It looks like that the jet stream is not going to be around. So that's great news for the rope fixers going to the summit. With good weather, they can make great time going up the Lhotse Face and, over the Geneva Spur and onto South Col and up the Triangular Face to the summit. And then Michael Fagan adds in that not only does the winds look fairly reasonable, 20 miles an hour on the summit around May 8th through the 10th, similar to what Chris said, but he also commented there could be some snow coming in. It's a little too early to declare exactly how much, but it's talking inches, not feet. So it won't be anything like what we saw last autumn over on the Tibetan side and even on the Nepal side when they get hit by that massive blizzard that left, I don't forgot what it was now, 4 or 6 feet of snow. That was crazy. But it looks like that's not the case this time. Michael goes on to say, so what's it look like after May 10th? He says, at least through the 13th, he doesn't see a jet stream on top of Everest. So again, that's great news because it's not the temperature, it's the wind that stops people from climbing. But he also makes a little bit of a disturbing comment that there's a weak low pressure system forming in the Bay of Bengal. He says it's way, way, way too early to know what it's going to develop into, if anything. But traditionally, that's what's brought the season to an end. Is that it's not only brought the season to an end, but it's also opened up the window. Is that when these cyclones or these tropical depressions in the Bay of Bengal form, they create pressure gradients that push the jet stream off of the summit. And that creates that weather window, which traditionally has occurred between roughly May 5th and May 25th. So about that 20-day, 3-week window. We'll see what happens this year. A couple of years ago, there were 2 typhoons that developed that came in back to back that created havoc for the climbers themselves. So hopefully that won't happen this year. But also the typhoon development in the Bay of Bengal that also signals the beginning of the monsoon season. It takes a few weeks for it all to materialize and start to impacting weather over India and Bangladesh and Nepal. So way, way too early to get worried about this. And as my mom used to tell me, don't borrow trouble. As far as the permits go, and I'll wrap it up with this one, that as of April 30th, Nepal had issued 1,050 climbing permits to 125 teams across 29 peaks. 1,000 people, 100 teams, 30 peaks. Wow. And Everest proper goes that Everest has climbers from 55 countries. That's pretty amazing if you think about it. And that there are, on Everest alone, they've issued 464 permits. And that's very close to the record of 479 2 years ago. And won't shock me a bit if it breaks the record. I started off two or 3 months ago predicting that they would issue 500 permits, and I'm not too far off on that. But for the 8,000 meter mountains, Annapurna has 27 permits, Dhaulagiri 30, Kanchenjunga 36, Lhotse has 111, and a lot of those are people that want to do Everest and Lhotse. Makalu 62, that's a lot for Makalu. And Manaslu 2. I love those guys. And something else I think is really good is that there are 100 female climbers on Everest this year. We've been seeing female climbers increase in numbers consistently. It's been a steady trend for about 7, 8 years now. So it's great to see the ladies on the mountains. Okay, that's it. If anything happens big this upcoming week, I will do definitely do a blog post. If it's really big, I'll do a podcast. But otherwise, I will see everybody on May 10th next Sunday. Have a great week. Thanks for listening. Climb on. This is Alan. Memories are everything.
The podcast on AlanArnett.com is sponsored by Summit Coach, helping aspiring climbers worldwide to reach their dreams.